Hello, I am Shivaji Bhaskar, Faculty of Russian at the School of Foreign Languages, IGNOU. I welcome you all to this course, Basics of Russian, Communication Skills, Part 1. As you know that in our previous modules, we have discussed about various aspects of the Russian grammar. We have discussed about nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and many other cases of the Russian case system. Now, in this module, we will be discussing about the case where we will see the usage of instrument for doing a kind of action. In order to understand a particular action, the case is known as the instrument case. In Russian, it is known as tvaritelny падеж. Now, in this module, we shall talk about the instrumental case where we will take plural forms, singular forms of the nouns, adjectives and pronouns. Now, let us go ahead and understand the instrumental case and how nouns, adjectives, etc. they are being changed. In Russian language, we use different forms of nouns, adjectives and pronouns. And thus, in order to understand a particular action done by some kind of instrument is largely used in this particular case, which is known as instrumental case or tvaritelny падеж. In order to understand it properly, let us pay attention to a few examples. Like in the previous modules, we have seen the usage of the nominative singular noun. Now, we shall take them and change to the certain cases where we will see how they are being changed from one case to another. In order to go into the usage of the instrument for an action, we shall understand the usage of such nouns first from nominative to dative and then to instrumental. We already know there are certain questions we have in the dative case, which is as per the requirement of the noun in animate or inanimate changes as kamu and chimu. So, now we shall take a few examples of it and then we will shift to the instrumental case and see what is the changes happen in the nouns. So, I am going to tell you the nouns in nominative form first and then we will see them as per the requirement in dative, and we shall pay attention to their nature, whether they are animate or inanimate. So, the first one is отец. In nominative form, отец remain отец, changes into отцам in dative. So, we have to understand that how these nouns in plural in dative changes. So, here we are going to discuss about nouns in plural number answering question kamu, chimu as per the nature of animative or inanimate. We have already seen how отец from nominative changes into отцам, because отец in nominative singular remains отец, but whenever we are changing them into plural changes. So, отец changes to отцам, engineer changes into инженером, врач changes into врачам, student changes into студентом, and brat changes into братьям. Likewise, друг changes into друзьям, гость changes into гостям, девушка changes into девушкам, бабушка changes into бабушкам, студентка changes into студенткам, сестра changes into сестрам, and дочь changes into дочерям. Likewise, мать, человек, ребенок also changes. Мать changes into матерям, человек changes into людям, and ребенок changes into детям. So, largely we have understood that how these singular nouns in nominative changes into plural in dative. Now, we shall take some examples of inanimate. In inanimated, we have used the nominative form with the question что. Likewise, in dative, if we use the question, it should be чему. So likewise, dom, gorad, sad, slavar, muzye, komnata. They should change as per the requirement of the dative case. How? Like dom changes into damam, gorad changes into garadam, sad changes into saddam, slavar changes into slavaryam, muzye changes into muzeam, komnata changes into komnata. Likewise, dver changes into dveryam, dеревня changes into dеревням, auditoria changes into auditorium, окно changes into окнам, письмо changes into письмам, and общежитие changes into общежитием. So here we have understood largely that despite of the fact that whether we have them in singular or plural, in kamu or chimu, or in sto or kto, the plural endings follow a certain rule. So that is why you also need to keep it in your mind in order to change them as per the requirement of the dative plural. Now, in order to understand it properly, let's pay attention to the activity. Директор завода подарил. Whenever we have this verb padarить, we know that this is a verb which is used in dative case. Padarить kamu. So, inžiniere. It's in plural, so we already know how to change it. Inžinieri changes into inžinieram. Часы. Директор завода подарил инженерам часы. So, director of the plant gifted часы is watch to the engineers because it is in plural. So, we have to follow a certain rule of sentence making whenever we are changing from Russian to English. So, director of the plant, plant means industrial plant in this case, padaril gifted engineers часы, watches. So, that's the style, that's the translation we can do. So, you have to follow the same style. Now, let's pay attention to the activity number 1. Хозяин дал кому гости, plural, гостям воды. The second one is она часто пишет. Кому писать? To write. To whom? Подруги, подругам письма. So, like this, you can also solve the exercises very easily. Now, let's pay attention to the third one. Ученик подошел к. Ученики changes into к ученикам и показал новый учебник по математике. The fourth one, я позвонил, to call. Кому? Друзья, friends, should change into plural of the dative. Друзьям. Я позвонил друзьям и пригласил их домой. The fifth one is старший брат сообщил. Сообщать, сообщить means to inform. Старший брат сообщил сестры. So, сестры should change into plural сестрам. Когда отец будет дома. So, like this, you can also solve the exercises very easily. You can also use other nouns which we have just learned in this module and make your own exercise. Now, let's pay attention to the adjectives in plural number answering the question kamu, chim. Usually, in this case, the interrogative word is каким. So, студенты помогали. So, студенты помогли старым женщинам. Старые женщины changes into старым женщинам. Помогать, помочь is a verb of dative case. So, студенты помогли, students helped старым женщинам, aged ladies. Каким женщинам помогли студенты? So, the question here we are going to use is каким? Старым женщинам. Каким старым женщинам помогли студенты? So, we have understood the usage of the adjective старый changes into старые, and in this case старым. Likewise, the second one is туристы ездили по новым местам. Каким местам? Новым местам. We know that in this particular case we have the adjective старый, новый. In plural it would be старые, новые, and in the context of dative it should be старым, новым. So like this you can also see and change other adjectives which you find in the modules and use them with nouns accordingly. Now let's pay attention to the questions we have. The normal question in plural which we use in nominative is kakiye. In dative, in animate or inanimate, we have kamu and chimu. So we have a list of certain adjectives in plural with the question kakiye, like novie, starie, izvestnie, kharoshie, injizkie. They should change as per the requirement of the dative in kamu and chimu. In kamu, novie would change along with a noun novim druzyam. For chimu, it would be novim mistam. Starie, starim zhenshinam, starim rayonam. Izvestnie, izvestnim pisachilyam, izvestnim darogam. Kharoshie, kharoshim uchidikam, kharoshim knigam. Injizkie, injizkim uchyonim, injizkim garadam. So here in this case you have very clearly seen that how along with the noun these adjectives can be used in plural in dative as kamu or chimu. So I hope the concept is clear to you all. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to the activity. Please pay attention to the model. Etat chilavek chasta pomagает kamu bednie ludzi. So bednie ludzi, it's already in nominative plural. It should change into the dative plural as bednim ludziam. Etat chilavek, this particular person, chasta, often, pomagает, helps. Help whom? Bednim ludziam. So poor people. So in this sentence the translation would come as this particular person often helps poor people. So we have to follow a certain rule of grammar whenever we are translating from Russian to English. Now let's pay attention to the first one. Mой брат часто звонит. Мой брат часто звонит. So whenever we are using the verb звонить, we already know this is a verb which is being used in dative. Звонить кому? Звонить близкие друзья. Close friends should change into близким друзьям in dative. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to the second one. Туристы ездили по разные исторические места. It should change into туристы ездили по разным историческим местам. The third one is русский студент рассказал новые индийские друзья о себе. So it should be русский студент. So it should be русский студент рассказал новым индийским друзьям о себе. The fourth one would be дети подошли к большие двери здания. So большие двери would change into большим дверям здания. And the fifth one would be опытные футболисты объяснили кому молодые футболисты молодым футболистам правила игры. So like this you can also solve the exercises while using rest of the adjectives and verbs as well as nouns which we have learned in the previous module. Now let's pay attention to a few pronouns. Pronouns which we will use in plural according to the usage of the case here. It should answer kamu and chimu as per the nature of the noun in animated or inanimate as per the usage of the grammar in animate or inanimate. So the possessive pronouns in plural, we already know in nominative we use the question che. In dative we have kamu and chimu. So moi, toi, nashi, vashi, swai should change into maim, twaim, nashim, vashim, swaim. Now let's put one noun along. Moi should change into maim and sistra changes into syostram. So mai, twai, nashi, vashi, swai, all of them are in plural. So we are using mai as maim syostram for kamu and maim komnatam for chimu. Likewise for twai, twaim druzyam, Tvayim knigam, Nashim bracyam, Nashim domam, Vashim rajichilyam, Vashim dveryam, Swayam druzyam, Swayam jirevnyam. So like this, if we follow the rules of the grammar, we can change the pronouns from plural, nominative to dative. We have to also understand that possessive pronouns like yivo, yo and ik, they always remain same. So in the previous module also we have seen that while using the possessive pronouns yivo, yo, ik, they do not change. Yivo, yo, ik, yivo, yo, ik, druzyam, yivo, yo, ik, aknam. So the possessive pronouns are same, however the ending of these plural nouns are changing. So we have understood clearly the concept of usage of plural nouns, adjectives in dative. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few demonstrative pronouns now. In plural, if we have the question chei, and in dative it should be kamu, chimu. If we are talking about the demonstrative pronouns in plural, so we have two like echi and che. So echi changes into echim jecham, che changes into chem jecham for kamu. For chimu it should change into echim museum and chem auditorium. Now let's do some activity in order to understand it properly. Let's pay attention to the model. Преподаватель объяснил че студенты. So че студенты should change into че студентам. Новые здания. Преподаватель объяснил чем студентам новые здания. Преподаватель объяснил чем студентам новые задания. So here the professor is explaining those students new exercises. Like this, you can also solve the exercises while using these different pronouns. The first one is Achit рассказал своей дети. So свои дети would change into своим детям, а своем друге. The second one is Министр спорта подарил кому? Нашим спортсменам машине. Учитель помог кому? Этим ученикам сделать упражнения. The fourth one would be дедушка показал кому? Моим друзьям редкие марки. Девушки подошли к кому? К своим знакомым и начали разговаривать. So like this you can also solve many exercises while following the same concept of the grammar for the dative in plural while using the pronouns. Now let's pay attention to a few more exercises in order to understand the role of grammar here. Let's pay attention to the model first. Я знаю студента, преподаватель сказал добрые слова. So here we are going to use the concept of который, which means which in Russian. Я знаю студента, которому преподаватель сказал добрые слова. So here который for the student changes into которому because student it's a masculine singular. In dative student changes into студенту, that is why который changes into которому. Борис пригласил девушку, он дал свой учебник по истории. Here we are going to use the noun in feminine gender. Let's see how it changes into который. Борис пригласил девушку. So for девушка, if we are using который in nominative, it should be которая. Которая changes into которой. Он дал книгу по истории. Likewise, Нина любит детей, которым она подарила игрушки. So for дети, because дети is plural in nominative, in this Нина любит детей, которым она подарила игрушки. So we have seen the singular of masculine, we have seen the singular of feminine and the plural. So while following the same concept, you can also change the endings while using который. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few exercises. The first one is это новый инженер, который. If we want to use который in this context, рабочий объяснил детали этой машины. So for engineer, it should be которому рабочие объяснили детали этой машины. Like this, женщина, for женщина, we already know который changes into которая in nominative. In dative, it should be Который позвонила сегодня мама живет недалеко. And студенты, plural, should changes into которым написал мой друг живут в другом городе. Это известный художник. Again, it's a singular for masculine gender in nominative. Changes into dative as которому молодые люди показывают свои картины. So, if we follow the rules of the grammar for dative, we can very easily solve the exercise. Now, let's go ahead and pay attention to the next one. Соседка, которой моя сестра помогает, ходит по комнате очень старая. The sixth one is девушки, которым Анна рассказала русские сказки, хорошо говорят по-русски. So like this you can change. Now we will discuss another important aspect of the Russian grammar about which we have started discussion in the beginning of this module. Largely the case where we use any instrument of action for performing or completing any sentence is known as the instrumental case or tvarichelny padej in Russian. So now we are going to talk about instrumental case in details. The forms of singular nouns, adjectives and pronouns indicating instrument of action. Largely it is known as the instrumental case where we will see some of the nouns in singular form in nominative changing into the tvarichelny form. So the nouns of masculine, feminine, neuter changes as well as the adjectives, pronouns, etc. also follows. So generally if we talk about the definition, then in Russian language we use forms of instrument of action for the completion of an action in a sentence is actually known as the instrumental case. Now let's take a few forms of nouns in singular. Forms of nouns indicating instrument means of action. It actually means with the help of something or someone we perform an action. So let's take singular masculine noun first in inanimate. The forms of masculine singular nouns indicating instrument means of action while answering the question chem. So like we have seen in rest of the cases which we have done in the previous modules, for example in dative we have two questions, kamu and chimu. Kamu is for animate and chimu is for inanimate. Likewise in this case we also have two questions. For animate we have kem and for inanimate we have chem. In this case we are going to talk about certain singular forms of nouns of masculine in chem. For example, школьник пишет с чем карандашом. Чем пишет школьник. Чем пишет школьник actually means with what the student or the disciple writes. So there we have karandash. Pencil is being used, an instrument for performing an action in a sentence. So here you can see how the relation between a particular thing is being used as an instrument. So that is why the grammar pattern which we follow here is школьник пишет чем, because karandash is inanimate. Karandash changes into карандашом. Чем пишет школьник? Школьник пишет карандашом. For example, if I have any other word for completing the sentence, like in place of karandash, which means pencil, I would like to change it with chalk. We know in Russian chalk means male. So the answer would be школьник пишет мелом. So male changes into мелом. So student writes with chalk, whereas in original sentence it is student writes with pencil. Here we are using singular nouns inanimate in instrumental. So we will follow the same style of grammar and the construction of sentences based on these rules. Now let's go ahead and see a few more examples. For the convenience, we have used što to indicate all these nouns are of inanimate. So karandash, noj, partfel, all of them, they belong to the masculine singular in inanimate. Likewise, in instrumental, they are known as chem. What changes into chem in Tvarichalni Pradesh? So karandash, karandashom, noj, najrom, partfel, partfelium, changes like this. Now let's see a few singular feminine nouns of inanimate nature of the instrumental case in order to understand the nuances of the grammar for this case. Forms of feminine singular nouns indicating instrument means of action while answering the question chem. Student, pishet, chem. So here we are going to use the noun ruchka of inanimate nature. Earlier, if you remember, we have used the noun of masculine of inanimate nature, karandash. Karandash changed into karandashom. Ruchka being a noun of the feminine gender in inanimate should change into ruchkai. Like we have been following the rules of the grammar in other modules. In other cases, we have seen how the noun's ending changes as per the gender. So, student pishet ruchkai. So, the question would be chem pishet student. Chem pishet student, student pishet ruchkai. So, like this, you can also use many other different forms of nouns while answering the question chem. Now, let's go ahead and pay attention to a few such nouns of the feminine gender, inanimate nature, in instrumental, and compare them with nominative. So, for nominative, the question is što, and we know for instrumental the question is chem. So, ruchka changes into ruchkai, vilka changes into vilkai, loshka changes into loshkai, vada changes into vadoi, mashina changes into mashinai, pesnya changes into pesnyai, and dver changes into dveriu. So, the singular nouns in masculine and in feminine, they follow a rule of grammar in instrumental. We have also seen in other modules about different cases where we have seen how the neuter changes. Mostly we have seen that neuter always follow the rules of the masculine. How about this case in instrumental? So, the forms of neuter singular nouns indicating instrument of action while answering the question chem would be, with the help of this example, let's understand. Akhotnik, udbil, chigra, rujom. So, rujo, which means rifle, is a noun of neuter gender, changes into rujom. Akhotnik, hunter, ubil, killed, chigra, tiger, chem. Chem means what? By what? So, it is rujo changes into rujom. Chem, akhotnik, ubil, chigra. Likewise, we can also understand many other nouns of the neuter in singular in nominative changes into instrumental with examples. Such as in nominative, we have the neuter gender nouns in singular such as akno, slava, pismo, yaitsa, malako, zdanya, rujo. Changes into akno, changes into aknom, slava changes into slavom, pismo changes into pismom, yaitsa changes into yaitsam, malako changes into malakom, zdanya changes into zdanyam, and rujo changes into rusham. So, we remember in masculine karandash changes to karandashom, akno changes into aknom. So, it is the same rule which we are following in instrumental as well. However, we have a few exceptions like we have seen in other cases as well, that how the ending, despite of the fact that they belong to the masculine or feminine, certain words are called exceptions. So, they change differently. So, we shall be talking about a few more such important aspects of grammar of Tvarichalni or the instrumental case in details in our upcoming modules, so that we understand the nuances of the Russian grammar easily, as well as with the help of all this knowledge which we have gained throughout these modules, We shall be using them in the form of exercises, solving them, understanding and using our own new words, verbs, expressions as well as passages, text, so that we understand all these 6 cases with clarity. I hope you all enjoyed this module very much. We shall be talking about Twari Chinni Padyes in details in our next module. Thank you.